Hey guys, it's me, Erica, from EsotericaReads. But I totally did read these books, and I'm reviewing them because I'm doing her job for her, because I'm amazing at this stuff.
Oh, how do I introduce this video concept idea? I guess I'll start by saying I have a very weird brain, and in the middle of the night, this is what happens. I'll insert some footage here of my notebook, which I started writing my TBR of books that I wanted to read this fall, and as I was writing it, I started to notice that some of the words matched other words from other title books. And this got me thinking that it would be cool to do like a TBR game where every book that I read has to have a word in it from the previous book I read. So let me demonstrate on the board I made. And I just used some scrapbooking paper I had and punched out these shapes, and then I used my little label maker to create this game. I just called it Trick or Treat Smell My Feet because that was cute. And they're all like either horror, mystery, or thriller books. So I'll start by showing you how the books connect. The first book that I wanted to read was The Yellow Wallpaper. It's a short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It's classic. It's been around forever, so that was on my list, and that's where we're going to start. And the reason I'm starting there is because the next book on the list is essential for this game, and I found this while actually searching wallpaper, because I knew that was a book I wanted to read, and then this book came up, which is called Bitten by Witch Fever, and the subtitle is Wallpaper and Arsenic in the Victorian Home. So obviously this title has many words I'm looking for in it. It has wallpaper, it has home, it has witch, and it has fever. And those all come into play in the game, as you'll see right here. Because Bitten by Witch Fever is right in the middle, and from here I can either go up, or I can go down, or I can go through. And the next one connected to Bitten by Witch Fever is Fever Dream, and I've actually read this already, but I enjoyed it so much and felt like it was time for a reread. So this is a horror in translation by Samantha Schweblin. And then I decided to connect that, Fever Dream, with In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. And this is a thriller that recently came out by Ashley Winstead, and I thought maybe I would enjoy listening to this on audio. So that was the next one, and then this one connects to The Old Woman with the Knife, because in my dreams I hold a knife. So we have The Old Woman with the Knife, and this is also a book in translation. I believe it's by a Korean author, and I don't really know much except that it's an old woman, and I think she's an assassin. So, and then the way that I could connect The Old Woman with the Knife down to The Last House on Needless Street was through The Woman in Our House. And I believe this is a recent thriller about a nanny, I believe. And this is by Andrew Hart. So some of these books have been on my TBR for a while, and then others I just found by searching for books for this video, specifically as filler books so I could connect one book to the other. So for example, The Woman in Our House is a filler thriller. So we also have a little like shortcut from The Woman in Our House down to White is for Witching if we read The Woman in White. I just thought the more options I have, the better. And The Woman in White is a classic horror by Wilkie Collins. This one is a big chunker too. Okay, so The Last House on Needless Street, I needed a book with the word house in it. And that brought me to The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. I do not have a physical copy of this, but I have it on my e-reader. And it is a thriller from the 1970s, thriller mystery, I believe. So that comes next, Lane, Street, that counts. From The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, I connected it to Little Eyes. This is another Samantha Schweblin book, written in translation. I believe this is a horror novel. And then Little Eyes connects to The Little Stranger, and this is a gothic horror by Sarah Waters. This has been on my shelf for a while, so I wanted to get to this. Then Little Stranger connects to The Stranger in the Mirror by Liv Constantine, and this is another filler thriller. I don't know much about this except that the woman has amnesia and can't remember her whole previous life, so thought that would be interesting. And The Stranger in the Mirror connects to Lonely Castle in the Mirror. Now I think this one is more like post-apocalyptic, or like, I know there's a school and there's some teenagers. It might be more like fantasy than horror specifically, but I'm excited to check this out. This one is also in translation and it's a Japanese author. Then from Lonely Castle in the Mirror, I made it so I can go in two directions. I can either read Dead Man's Mirror, which is a short story by Agatha Christie featuring Hercule Poirot. And so I have that one on my e-reader. I thought it would be good to put some shorter options in here with the longer ones. Or I can go down on the game to We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Lonely Castle in the Mirror, Always Lived in the Castle. I've read Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, and I really enjoyed that one, so I want to check out this one. Then I needed a way to connect these castle books with the next thing on the list, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, but I went with The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. It works, see? And this is actually an art copy that I've had forever and never gotten around to it. And I connected The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle with Death in Her Hands by Otessa Moshfegh. I previously enjoyed her book Elaine, and so I thought I would check this one out. I believe this one's kind of like a psychological mystery thriller about this older woman. And then Death in Her Hands, I connected to The Red Right Hand by Joel Townsley Rogers. And I guess this is a classic mystery written in the 40s about this man who murders someone off the highway and they're trying to figure out who did it. And from The Red Right Hand, I connected it to The Crimson, because crimson is like red, right? So that counts. The Crimson Petal and the White. Talk about another chunker. This thing is huge, but I've heard that this is so good. It's a mystery, I believe, set in 1870s London, and I believe there are like prostitutes, there's a family, there's socialites. It's just that it's a Victorian novel that's very interesting, and I'm not quite sure if it's even thriller or horror. It might just be like of its time, but I heard like it's spooky kind of, or great for fall. Who knows? So then we have, because this is The Crimson Petal and the White, I connected it back up to White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. So as you see, I wanted to not just have a game where the next book could match the next book, but that they all circled back to each other and could go back to the beginning with words that connected. So that way, I can go this way, or I can go this way, or I could go this way and then this way. Like, the options are endless, because as long as I'm reading the next book that connects to the next book, then it works. And there's no winning or losing the game. This just helps me pick what I'm going to read next. As you can see, I even made a shortcut here because I realized the little girl who lives down the lane can connect to We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So if I don't want to read all these books, then I'll skip over here and go here. So I have quite a few options for mood reading and, you know, try a chapter. So I'm not always limited to just one book that I can read next. So I'm also letting myself DNF. So if there's a book on here that I try reading, let's say I'm right here and I don't have options but to go to the next one, then I will let myself DNF if the book isn't working for me so I can keep going in the game. There are 20 books on here total. So that means that this first video isn't going to be able to obviously read all of them. And in fact, I'll probably split this up into parts. But the nice thing about this is whatever books I don't get to, I can just keep playing the game until I've read them all. Or I can even come back next October and use this again for the books that I didn't end up reading. So I'm excited to get started. And if you want to play along, go ahead and read these books with me. All right, since the first stop on my Trick or Treat Smell My Feet game is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Let's get started. This story is only 20 pages long, so I'll read it in no time, but I have a collection of a lot of her other books if I so desire to read more of her stories. I also have a Charlotte Perkins Gilman book that I found at the thrift store called The Crux, and I don't think this one is a scary one, but I'm interested, if I like The Yellow Wallpaper, if I'll be interested in this. I assume so. That's why I picked it up at the thrift store. The only thing I know about this is a woman starts to go insane a little bit, and has to do with the wallpaper. I don't know much, so I'm gonna go read it, and then I'll let you know what I think. I hope it's nice and spooky. We will see. Finished The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is definitely a short story where the author is exploring feminism and questioning the culture of the times. She's definitely critiquing the treatment of women in regards to mental illness or any physical illness. The treatment by doctors at the time was like, okay, well, go rest. Be isolated, be alone in this house, in a room, and just rest all the time. And maybe like go on vacation, go to the sea, but mostly just don't do anything. Like, don't do anything social, don't do anything creative, don't do any work. That would be the worst thing, is to do any work. And it's interesting because the main character in this story is married to a doctor, so he's like extra controlling. Like, I know what's best for you, and this is what you need to do. You need to rest. And the story starts with medical gaslighting. Her husband's a doctor and her brother is also a doctor, so you've got double medical gaslighting. They go to stay at this vacation home, and she immediately tells her husband, like, something feels strange in this house and in this room. And he's like, no, it's just a draught, like, you're fine. Like, so much gaslighting. I do love how she describes the wallpaper in this part. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye and following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide. Plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. That's some good writing right there. If you're going to read a version of this story, I would recommend this one because there's an introduction by Hallie Butler, and she does a great job of putting the story into the context of modern day. Specifically with how Charlotte Perkins Gilman was mostly concerned with rich white women problems. And she was really into eugenics, and Hallie Butler even calls her a white nationalist. So it's good to have historical context for this story and to know what her goal was in writing it. She was trying to bring more awareness to female autonomy, and at the time the story didn't get the attention that it deserved, so I don't know if that goal was even met. But nowadays we like to read it and enjoy it for what it is. I think it's interesting the symbolism in the beginning of there being bars on the windows and how the room used to be a nursery for children, as if it's her jail and he's the sentencer. I also think it's interesting the husband sometimes talks about her in third person while she's right in front of him, like, so condescending. So while I've been reading this, I've also been reading Bitten by Witch Fever, Wallpaper and Arsenic in the Victorian Home by Lucinda Hawksley. It gives you samples of all the wallpapers that most likely had arsenic in them at the time. And then in these short chapters, it gives you the information about the manufacturers of wallpaper, especially in Britain, but also it goes into America and Germany a little bit, and then how they discovered arsenic in the wallpapers and then how they eventually got rid of it. But it really makes me think that a lot of women at this time period, and especially this one, was dealing with arsenic poisoning and the side effects of it. So that's fascinating. I also think it's interesting that I recently read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and there is a reference in that book to yellow wallpaper being used, and also, not to give spoilers, but what ends up being a big part of the plot is also kind of mentioned in here. Well, there's a connection that you'll see if you've read both. And also I recently read A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, and he specifically mentions the yellow wallpaper in that book though that book references so many horror and classic horror stories and movies. And then his other book, The Cabin at the End of the World, also one of the rooms in that cabin has yellow wallpaper. So there's so many contemporary references to this story that it's good that I've read it now. Anyway, this I would give probably 4 stars. Nice and creepy, and only 20 pages, so you should check it out. And this one I would give 4 stars to as well. It was definitely very informative. There were parts of it that got a little boring, and it's definitely more of a book to look at than to get all the content from, but I did learn a lot about like health trends in the 1800s in England and that sort of thing. So also check this out if you're interested, though I believe this was made in England and I bought it on eBay, so it might be hard to get if you're in America. So you're the queen of the Pillow Mountain. Look at that. Are you proud of your accomplishment? Yeah. I decided to come film in the kitchen for a change of scenery, and I forgot that I have this fluorescent light that just buzzes. It will eventually go away, but I have to wait till it stops. Alright, it stopped buzzing. It might be still there, but just very quiet. Okay, so as you saw on my game board, the next places I can go are one of 3. We have the home route, where I can do The Last House on Needless Street. We have the witch route, which is white is for witching. And we have the fever route, which would be Fever Dream. Now I've read this already, but it was like 3 years ago, and I'd love to reread it. So I don't know. I read the first page of all of these and I like them all. So I'm gonna try a chapter and then I'll come back and let you know which route I'll be going. It's kind of intimidating because once I'm there, I can only go to the next spot, and the next spot, I have to be cool with what the next book is. So let's go. Let's try these 3 and see which one is speaking to me the most right now. I'll be back. Well, I went to read a chapter of each book. I started with The Last House on Needless Street. I think there's an old man who kind of has the mind of a child. It's hard to know at this point after only a chapter. But he has a cat, and he either does or doesn't have a little girl. And there is a new neighbor who comes over to check up on him. And honestly, the writing style is interesting and I'm very intrigued. I think this is the book that I'm gonna read. But let me just say that I read the first chapter of White is for Witching and I was a little confused. The writing style is very unique. I've heard good things about this one, and the premise of it being like a gothic story that involves a big giant house, and the house kind of has a character of its own, sounds amazing. And I think there's 4 generations of witches. I'm not quite sure. But the first chapter, while it was interesting, it was a little bit confusing and it didn't hold my interest as much as The Last House on Needless Street. So I probably will read this soon, but as far as the next book I'm picking up, it's probably Needless Street. But I also picked up Fever Dream, and like I said, I've read this before, but I forgot that there aren't chapters in this. It's just like one long stream of consciousness. And so I got to like page 50 before I realized like, oh, I should probably consider that like a good sampling. But I can't stop. I'm too sucked into the story. Again, I'm on page 124 and I'm probably gonna finish reading this tonight. So on my board game, all that does is it gives me extra options. So I can either go the route of Fever Dream or I can go the route House on Needless Street. So I'll finish this, I'll read the last House on Needless Street, and then I'll look at the board game and see what I want to read next based on that. So I wasn't planning on reading 2 books at the same time, but that's what's gonna happen now. If you're not familiar with Fever Dream, this is a work of translation by Samantha Schweblin, and the translator is Megan McDowell. Basically, there's a woman who is in a hospital clinic, and there is a boy named David who is talking to her while she is experiencing fever and some other symptoms, and he is asking her to remember certain events. And she is pulling up her memory, and then you get the story of what's been happening in the last few days, and it's just so addicting. You don't want to put it down. The writing style is very, like I said, stream of consciousness, but also you don't really know why this little boy is talking to her like he's an adult. There's a lot about parenting and fear of your child being separated from you, and the fear of the unknown and of strangers and nature being able to harm you. There's something about animals in horror stories that really gets me. I think the terror of it is like, if something's hurting them or killing them, then you know humans are just fucked. Anyway, so I'm gonna go finish my reread of this. It'll only take a few minutes, and then I'll start on chapter 2 of The House on Needless Street. I forgot to say this is by Katrina Ward. I put this little Halloween banner in here, so I gotta show you how cute it is. It came with these like fairy lights. So here, I'll turn off the light so you can see how it looks. Oh, look how cute! I love it. There's like little ghosts on it. I probably should actually have them strung up here where the horror mystery is. That would make more sense. But then you couldn't see them as in my background. So cute. Hello. I am in a thrift store parking lot because I just went shopping, but I need to tell you about The Last House on Needless Street. What did I even read? So, I don't know if I went over the premise of this, but the way they describe it is like, there's a boarded up house, there's a teenage girl who's not allowed outside, there's a man who drinks a lot and has gaps in his memory, and then there's a secret that binds them together. Oh, and there's a cat who loves reading the Bible. So that's what you think you're getting. And honestly, when I was a third of the way through it, I was like, I just don't like that I have no idea what's happening. There's so many inconsistencies and issues that you're like, what is going on? Like, clearly the author is building this up to something, but I don't know where she's going with this. It's really hard to talk about this book without spoilers, so I'm gonna try, because I really enjoyed it. Once I got past the halfway point, when you're about 65% of the way through, I think, is when things start to be revealed. And everyone told me, like, just keep with it. Like, you'll be glad the payoff is good. And the payoff is good, but now it's the kind of book where I need to go back and reread it to, like, fully appreciate what the author was doing. I think she did a great job. I think this is a really hard book to write. Again, I can't give away the spoilers, but because of what happens at the end, constructing this would be a beast. This would be so hard to write. And because of that, I gave it 5 stars, because it wasn't like a perfect book. I feel like there were characters that could have been a little more fleshed out and extraneous characters that could have been left out, honestly. But I like books that leave you second guessing yourself and wondering and coming up with theories. And there's some people in my life who I think would really appreciate it, and I think it's people who want this kind of a book where you just kind of, it blows your mind a little bit. I'm still processing it. Like, there's so much about it that I need to process. I heard the audiobook is really good. I didn't listen to the audiobook, I read it physically, but I'm kind of tempted to reread it on audio by listening, because I feel like I get so much more out of it. I don't know how to say this author's name. Is it Katrina or Catriona? Either way, I think I want to read some of her other books just to see if I'm a fan, because I think she's very skilled at what she does, and so I want to read more. Okay, so now the next book on the list, I'm going to have to pull out the game and look, but I believe there's a book that's related to the word street. I think it's The Last Girl Down the End of the Lane, or At the End of the Lane, or something. I don't have a physical copy of it because it wasn't at my library, but I have it on my e-reader, and so I might read that one next. There's like a movie of it too, featuring Jodie Foster, so I could watch that after I read it. I think this would be a cool movie, but I don't know how you could pull it off. Or there's a book that has the word house on it. Actually, you guys are sitting on it. If I go the other way on the route, there's a book with the word house in it, and that is The Woman in the House. And I got this from the library. This one is about this couple that the mom decides to go back to work, and so she has to hire a nanny for her kids. The nanny's name is Oakland, which is such a Utah name, because it's spelled Oak and then Lynn. That is just a Utah name. Anyway, so they hire Oakland as their nanny, and then their kids start to have like these weird illnesses and injuries. So I'm a little intrigued. This is one that wasn't originally on my TBR, but when I was searching for books that had the word woman and house in it, this came up, and I was intrigued by the premise. So tonight I'll probably try a chapter of this and The Girl at the End of the Lane. The Girl Down at the Lane. I don't know. And then I will let you know which one I prefer. I feel like I'm gonna get in a reading slump if I try to read something after Last House on Needless Street, because that was so good, and like, how can I compare the next thing I read to that? I don't know, we'll see. At the thrift store, I just found Kaiki. I don't know how to pronounce this, but I don't really love this thrift store because they way overpriced their books, and this book was $8. They put like their new releases that high, but the other one I go to, this same book would have only been like $5, so I'm kind of annoyed, but at the same time I really wanted this one, so that's still like half off the original price, so I don't mind. And then I also collect these old library editions of books where the covers are like these amazing designs. I don't really care what the books are. This one is Spring of Malice and To Catch a Spy, but like, I just think they look so cool on my shelves, and I'm starting to grow a little bit of a collection, and they were only $2 each, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, I'm gonna go to Trader Joe's because I'm out of gluten-free pumpkin bread. Okay, so bye.
My life.
Oh, Esper made these delicious cookies. Pumpkin chocolate chip.
I have chocolate on my shirt and ham.
Didn't turn out that great. They're a little flat. But the second and third batches are great. Ooh, so yummy. Hello. So we have gone yellow wallpaper, Bitten by Witch Fever, The Last House on Needless Street, and now I'm right here. So I could go up here, and actually I tried reading The Woman in Our House, and let me grab it. Remember how I was saying that this character's name is Oakland and how it totally sounded like a Utah name? Well, I was right. It's because, okay, so I started to read this. I couldn't believe it. So this family wants to hire a nanny, and the woman is talking to her friend, and she's like, oh, I hired a nanny from this service in Utah. They have these really great nannies that were like Mormon or something. They're raised with all these kids, and so she says these quirky Mormon names. I'd already seen a Tinsley, a Drakel, a Kaisley, and an Olivian, which I thought sounded like a PMS drug. Okay, and then we get the actual like nanny's point of view, and she lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, and like it's so random. She like went to a bank, but the author specifically named like a local bank we have here that you don't have in other places. And I was like, okay, most books don't like name these places, these stores. They just say like, I went to a bank or we went to a mall. And this character talks about a mall where she got something and she said the Gateway Mall, which is a mall that we have here. And I'm like, that's just weird. It feels like the author just like Googled a bunch of Utah things, because the author is not from Utah, as far as I can tell. Oh, and the other thing that was weird is that, so this nanny and her husband are like fairly newlyweds, and they're going on a mission to Japan, I believe. I feel like the author didn't do their research very well, because in the Mormon church, you don't go on missions when you're married until you're like an old couple, like a grandma and grandpa. They don't let young couples go for lots of reasons, but when you're young, you go when you're single. You don't go with a partner. The author like did their research, but definitely not enough. Like the premise of this, like I said, I only read a few pages, but the premise is that like this nanny, she used to be a nanny in Salt Lake City, Utah. She's going on the mission. Her like friend that just moved to Utah like is gonna steal her identity on the nanny website, and she's gonna go be a nanny. Like, first of all, this friend of hers is like, oh, let me call and cancel all of your credit cards because you need rest. And she's just like, okay, sure. Like, what a moron. Who does that? Who just like lets somebody cancel their credit cards for them? So then obviously she doesn't cancel them. And then like she like steals her ID. I think it was like a temporary ID or something. But anyway, it's so unrealistic. Like, so I'm like, there's no way I can read this. But and then this book had so much like fat shaming. Like, okay, so it mentions that the nanny and then the girl who's gonna pretend to be her are like a little bit bigger. Like, it doesn't say, I'm trying to find the spot where it describes them. Oh, here we go. They were both biggish girls, both in their late 30s. And those were also reasons Oakland felt so fortunate in her sudden marriage, so blessed. She feared for Nadine that for all her friends' gifts, the world would not see her potential for goodness and beauty behind that slightly frumpy and aging exterior. Now, as far as I know, this woman is like 38. She's frumpy and aging, apparently. And then the guy, so then they hire the nanny based on like the online profile. And then the husband, he's talking about his car. So it says that they usually use Anna's Camry. And he had deliberately not fitted child seats in the Lexus, saying he needed the space for when he had to drive clients. But as the kids got older, they need something bigger. And then he says, was it possible they'd also have to drive around this new nanny? She looked like she'd need some room. The fuck? So you can see why I'm not gonna read this. Like, oh. I was right about Oakland. Okay, so then... So that was the woman in our house. So that was me trying to go this way. Because I can go any way. Remember? I can go here, 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 here. Just as long as it's connected to a book I've already read. So, we're going here. The little girl who lives down the lane. And this is a book that was written in the 70s. And it's on my e-reader. And I gotta say, the premise of this sounded interesting because it's like a little girl lives in this house. Well, she's not little, she's like 13. And She lives with her dad, supposedly, but everyone's questioning that. And there may or may not be a dead body. Things have happened. So anyway, it sounded like a horror. It sounded like a horror thriller and maybe something I was interested in. But unfortunately, this book, so it's not a spoiler, but it opens with like the girl kind of celebrating her own birthday, and she's got like candles on a cake and everything. And this man comes and knocks at her door and is like, trick or treat, it's Halloween. He is the son of the landlord that's renting her the house. And he's like, oh, it's Halloween. Don't you have any treats? My kids are on their way. And she's like, I have some cake I can give you. And he's like, is it your birthday? Are you 13? And she's like, yep. And then he gets all skeevy and creepy and he starts calling her pretty, and then he slaps her ass. And then he says, oh, you have to have that because it's your birthday spanking. A grown-ass man who's married and she's 13. He keeps like bothering her and coming around, and then the actual landlord, his mom, shows up the next day, and the girl and her kind of get into an argument. And then it's like what happens from then on. I might talk spoilers. I don't know. Should I? I think I should, because I don't know how many of you are actually going to read this. But if you decide you want to read it, I'll put spoilers on the screen so that you can fast forward this part, okay? When the landlord comes over, she wants something from the cellar, and the girl is like, I'll get it for you. You can't go down there. And she's like, well, I'm going to go anyway. So she goes down into the cellar. The girl like freaks out and like closes and locks the cellar door on her. And we don't know why. We just know the girl didn't want her to go down there. And then she has to figure out a way to like kill this woman. She checks and the woman is like unconscious, but she's not dead. So she like hooks up this hose to like, that goes into like the basement cellar area, and then she like puts gas in there. She figures out how to put gas in there, and she like kills the woman. Then the landlord's car is there, and she's got to figure out a way to get rid of the car. And so this boy is riding his bicycle up the street, and he's like a 16-year-old boy, and he stops and is like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, oh, I need to get rid of this car. And he kind of doesn't question her. He's like, oh, I'll do it for you. So he takes the keys and drives it, and then he comes back and he's like, why were you trying to get rid of that car? And she's like, just because. And then they kind of start to grow a bond, and she opens up to him and eventually tells him what happened. Then she opens up the cellar door, and they go down there together, and then they come back up, and he's like, so how long has your mom been dead? And you're like, what? So apparently that was the big reveal, that her mom is dead and is down in the basement, dead body. And so there's 2 dead women down there, and that was why she had to kill her, because she saw her dead mom. And apparently she tells him, oh, my dad, he died. He was sick, but he left me a letter, and he made sure I knew that like he wanted me to stay in this house all by myself. And he didn't want them to force me to go to school, because she was like homeschooled and everything. And she's supposed to be like really mature and independent. And so she's like, he just wants me to stay and lie. Like, what a great dad. He's like, I want my 13-year-old to stay by herself in this giant house. The creepy guy keeps like coming over and is like, where's my mom? I think something happened with my mom. And yeah, eventually the 13-year-old and the 16-year-old, I can't really remember their names, they end up having sex. And it's gross, even though this guy is younger than the old creepy guy. It's still gross. It's a 13-year-old. Like, the book was like interesting in that there was a lot of focus on characters, and so I didn't get bored. I kept wanting to read it. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's a thriller or a horror. There was never like any moments where they like walk you through. Well, near the end, the creepy guy comes back, and then you kind of, there's a scene with him that's pretty tense. Then I watched the movie. So the movie stars Jodie Foster. In all of the interviews she's done where she talks about this movie in hindsight, she always talks about not enjoying her time on the set, that the producers and the director were pretty gross, and they wanted to do this sex scene. There's a whole bunch that they changed for the movie because they didn't want to make the 13-year-old look like a killer, so they made a lot of the deaths like accidental, which kind of took away from the whole vibe of the story, which was that the girl could do everything by herself, including killing people if she needed to. She wasn't like evil, but she was like, oh, well, Dad told me to get rid of these people. I'm going to get rid of them. So Jodie Foster does a great job acting, but you can tell she's just miserable the whole time. So they decided they wanted to do that sex scene, but she's literally a kid. And so I guess they had her sister like take her clothes off and you can see the back of her body naked, and then she climbs into the bed, and then it switches to Jodie Foster being in bed with the male actor. And she just always said that she hated that she knew people would assume that that was her body. 13. So, except the creepy guy was played by Martin Sheen, and that was kind of hilarious because his hair is long and he's like trying to be a creep. But if you want that sexy 70s soundtrack and the haircuts, you should watch it. Anyway, I don't know why I read that book, except that I needed a book that had little in the title and street or lane. So in my search, I found The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. It's advertised as the thriller horror mystery, but apparently not. So next I'm gonna try to read Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, and then I'll see how that goes, and then I will let you know. As you can see, I could also take the path that goes down to We Have Always Lived in the Castle, because the little girl who lives down the lane. So I think I'm going to just try a chapter for each of those and then see what's holding my interest, and then I'll come back and let you know. Bye. You're gonna regret going out there. Minute and 28 seconds until midnight. 56 seconds. Oh my god. 43 seconds. 10 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, of course something went wrong. Come on, Spotify. Oh, we got it. Come here, Espy. Hi all, I'm just gonna do a quick wrap up. This video ended up a bit longer than I thought it would be, and so let's just quickly update you on the game. So we were on The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, and then the next book was Little Eyes, and I attempted to read this one. but I just wasn't in the mood for it. I'm sure it's a great book and I'll probably read it at some point. I kind of got into a reading slump, and so I didn't feel like reading. I didn't feel like filming. I do want to read some more on the game board, but it's just gonna have to be in another vlog. So I did have some clips of me listening to the Midnight's album for the first time. Obviously I couldn't keep filming while I listened for copyright reasons, but I loved it. I am such a pop girly when it comes to Taylor Swift. I enjoyed Folklore and Evermore, but I'm very happy that she seems to be back in her pop era. Reputation is my favorite album of all time, so this has been great. And her tour was announced, and I am going to try to get tickets to the Vegas show since that's the closest to me. And we'll see, Esper might go with me. I'm just so excited. This is like a Swiftie's best time to be alive. Anyway. Oh, hi. Oh, kisses. Oh. She can't handle when someone's talking in a room and she's not there. She always has to be where people are talking. This is Lola, by the way. Look at the camera. Here. Thanks for sticking around and watching me review all these books. If you made it this far into the video, please leave a dog emoji for Lola. Bye.
Yeah, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'm not actually Erica if you couldn't tell. Bye, love you.